She was dressed for the room. She had the badge. She had the confirmation. She had paid for the ticket herself. And still, she couldn't get in. The man with the clipboard didn't hesitate. He barely even looked twice. Behind her, someone she recognized walked straight through. No check, no question, just through. And nobody in that line said a word, not one. She stepped to the side, not because she was wrong, not because she didn't belong, but because she had learned a long time ago that some fights need a different room. What they didn't know was that she had already started building one. For 11 years. Before we get into this unbelievable story, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. It's amazing to see how far our Curious Chronicles family reaches. If you love heart-stopping, awe-inspiring stories that make you feel everything, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We share epic can't-look-away tales every week. Let's jump in. Nia Monroe was not the kind of person who asked for things twice, not because she was proud, though she was, quietly, in the way people are proud when pride is the only thing that hasn't been taken from them, but because she had learned early that asking twice made you a problem, and being a problem in her industry meant being managed out, reassigned, or simply talked about in rooms you were never invited into. She was 34 years old. A structural engineer, the kind who actually understood the calculations, not the kind who approved them after someone else ran the numbers. She had spent the last 6 years at a mid-tier firm doing work that kept bridges standing and buildings code compliant, work that routinely ended up in senior presentations under other people's names. She had stopped flinching at that somewhere around year 3. Her apartment reflected her priorities. Functional. Clean, a shelf of certification binders next to a shelf of novels she kept meaning to finish. A photo of her mother on graduation day, holding the commencement program with both hands, as if it were something fragile that might be taken away. The credit card on her kitchen table told its own story. The $1,200 GALA ticket had gone on it the same week she paid the last installment on a professional development course her firm had declined to sponsor. She had done the math. She had decided the GALA was worth it. The Whitford Infrastructure Gala happened once a year, and the people inside that room made decisions that shaped which firms got contracts, which engineers got referenced, and which names started appearing on the right documents. She had registered 3 weeks in advance. She had confirmed twice. She had printed the confirmation email and folded it into her breast pocket. She had pressed her blazer 3 times because the collar kept curling, and because she needed at least one thing about that evening to be exactly right. Her mother had called that morning, not about the gala. Nia hadn't told her about it, not wanting to explain if it didn't lead anywhere. Her mother had called because she called every few weeks, and because every few weeks she found a gentle way to say the same thing. Nia, you're too good to keep waiting for people to notice. Nia had said, I know, Ma. Soon. She had meant it, loosely, the way you mean things that feel true but have no date attached. The Meridian Grand Hotel sat at the far end of the city's financial corridor, the kind of building that communicated importance through understatement. Dark stone, brass fixtures, a doorman who never smiled but always nodded at the right people. The line to get in moved steadily. She recognized faces, consultants who had never filed an independent assessment in their careers, architects whose firms had junior engineers do everything below the signature line, men who spoke about structural integrity at panels without having sat with the raw calculations for more than an afternoon. They all went through. Nia reached the front. The man with the clipboard ran his finger down the list slowly, the way people do when they already know the answer and are deciding how to deliver it. He looked up. I'm sorry, ma'am, you're not on the approved list. She didn't react, not outwardly. She had been in enough rooms where her reaction was the thing being watched. She produced the confirmation. He glanced at it with the attention of someone checking the time. Enough to say he'd looked, not enough to actually see. "I don't make the decisions. You'll need to step aside." And that was when she heard the voice behind her. Familiar, unhurried. Edward Kensington moving up the line with two associates, already mid-conversation, already laughing. He saw her. She knew he saw her. She watched the recognition move across his face and then move on, the way water moves around something it has decided isn't an obstacle. The clipboard man waved Kensington through without looking at the list at all. Naya stood very still for one moment. Around her, people shifted. Someone had a phone out, maybe two people. She couldn't be sure what they were doing with it. She didn't look long enough to find out. She stepped to the side. She crossed the street. She sat down on the stone bench outside the parking garage. She opened her notes app, and she began, in the quiet and precise way she had been trained to document everything that mattered, to write down exactly what had just happened. The date, the time, the name on the clipboard man's lanyard, and then one sentence. "I was registered. Someone removed me. Find out who made the call." She had been keeping notes like this for 11 years. She was very good at it. And tonight, without knowing it yet, the people inside that building had just given her something she hadn't had before. A reason to use them. The conference room on the 14th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city that nobody looked at. That was the thing about rooms like this. The view was for impressing visitors, and everyone already inside had stopped being impressed a long time ago. 8 people sat around the table. Naya Monroe stood at the front of it, clicker in hand, walking them through load distribution projections for the Caldwell Overpass renovation bid. She had been preparing this presentation for 11 days, not because it was complicated. She could have built it in 4, but because she knew this room. She knew that in this room, precision was not enough. You had to be so precise, so clean, so airtight that there was no gap for anyone to slide a hand into and rearrange what you'd built. She had cross-referenced every figure. She had pulled 3 comparison models. She had anticipated the 2 questions most likely to come from the senior side of the table and built the answers quietly into slides 11 and 12, so that when the questions came, the room would already have the answer before anyone had to ask. She was on slide 9 when Edward Kensington leaned forward. He didn't raise his hand. Men like Kensington never raised their hands. He simply began speaking, and the room, trained by years of habit, shifted its attention toward him the way a plant shifts toward light, without deciding to. "What we're really looking at here," he said, "is a load-bearing recalibration across the central span. The margin Nia's outlined gives us the flexibility we need on the south approach without compromising the bid floor." He said it with the relaxed authority of someone summarizing their own idea. It was her number, her language, her conclusion, the one she had been 4 sentences away from delivering herself. 2 people at the table nodded. One wrote something down. The project director said, "Good point, Edward," and looked back at the screen. Naya clicked to slide 10. She did not pause. She did not look at Kensington. She finished her presentation in 11 minutes, answered 2 questions, neither of them directed at her initially. Both redirected her way only after the room realized she was still standing there and closed her laptop. The project director thanked her by name, which she noted was the first time he had used it in the meeting. She was packing her bag when she felt someone fall into step beside her in the corridor. She didn't know him well. Marcus Holloway. She had seen his name on internal distribution lists, knew he was a project manager at Whitford, knew he had a reputation for being careful and quiet in the way that some people are careful and quiet because they are watching everything. He didn't say hello. He said, "That was your number." Naya kept walking. "I know. The whole load recalibration framing. That was yours. I'm aware." He was quiet for a few steps. Then, "Does that happen often?" She looked at him for the first time. He was asking genuinely, not performing sympathy, not building toward a point, just asking. Often enough, she said. They reached the elevator. He pulled a card from his jacket pocket and held it out. She looked at it for a half second before taking it. There was something deliberate in the way he offered it. Not casual, not networking automatic, like he had decided to give it to her somewhere in the middle of that conference room and had been waiting for the right moment since. I might have something, he said. It would need to be quiet, independent. Outside the main bid structure, the elevator opened. Nia stepped in. Send me the details, she said. The doors closed. She didn't think about it much that evening. She had learned not to hold on to maybes. The industry ran on maybes that evaporated by morning, on conversations in corridors that meant everything in the moment and nothing by the following week. She filed his card in the small section of her wallet where she kept things that might matter, and went home and made dinner and checked her credit card balance, and did not think about Edward Kensington. Rephrasing her conclusions in front of 8 people who would now associate that insight with his name. She thought about it once, briefly, and then she let it go. 23 days later, Marcus Holloway's email arrived at 11:14 p.m. It was 3 paragraphs, carefully worded, professionally distanced. He didn't name the project directly in the opening. He didn't reference Whitford by name until the second paragraph, and even then, only obliquely. He used the phrases, an independent structural review outside normal procurement channels, and complete discretion would be essential. Then a third time, she understood what he was asking. She also understood what he wasn't saying, which was louder than anything in the email. A project manager at a firm the size of Whitford did not commission independent reviews through personal late-night emails unless he had found something he couldn't bring upstairs. And he didn't reach out to someone like Nia unless he trusted the work more than he trusted the people around him. She opened a reply. She wrote 4 words. Send me the file. She pressed send and closed her laptop. What she didn't know, what she had no way of knowing at 11:27 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, was that those 4 words had just made her a problem for someone who had spent 30 years making problems disappear. The file Marcus sent was 43 pages. Nia read it once straight through, the way she always read technical documents the first time, without a pen, without stopping, without forming conclusions, just absorbing, letting the structure of it settle before she started pulling at threads. Then she read it again, this time with a pen. By page 12, she had circled 4 figures. By page 21, she had drawn a line connecting 3 assumptions that the original engineers had treated as independent variables, but that were, in fact, load-bearing on each other in a way the document never acknowledged. By page 37, she had stopped circling things and started writing numbers in the margin instead. Her own numbers, run from scratch, using the same inputs the contracted team had used, but following them honestly to where they actually led. The answers were different, not dramatically, not in a way that would make a headline or cause an immediate failure, but different in the specific, compounding way that engineering tolerances work, where a 2% variance here and a 3% optimization there, and a load assumption shaved just slightly on the conservative end all add up, over time and traffic volume and seasonal stress, to a structure that will do exactly what it was designed to do, right up until the moment it doesn't. She sat with that for a long time. She was not an alarmist. She had spent her career resisting the instinct to catastrophize, because catastrophizing in engineering was its own kind of unprofessional. It muddied assessments, created liability noise, gave people reasons to dismiss findings before they'd been properly read. So she went back through her numbers. She checked her references. She pulled the ASCE standard and read the relevant sections, not to confirm what she'd found, but to challenge it, to give the original report every opportunity to be right. It wasn't right. The deviations were real, each one defensible in isolation, Collectively, they painted a picture of calculations that had been engineered to win a bid rather than to build a bridge. She wrote the report over 4 weeks. Clean. Sourced. Every deviation documented with page references to the original. Every alternative calculation shown in full. She did not editorialize. She stated what she found and let the numbers carry the weight, because in her experience, numbers were harder to argue with than conclusions, and she expected this report to be argued with. She sent it to Marcus on a Wednesday evening. He opened it within the hour. She could see the read receipt. He did not reply that night. He replied 3 days later. "I need some time." She wrote back, "Of course, let me know if you have questions on any of the methodology." He didn't ask about the methodology. 6 weeks passed. She checked the Caldwell contract status twice during that period, once at 3 weeks, once at 5, and both times it was still listed as pending municipal review. She told herself that was good. It meant there was still time. It meant Marcus was doing something with what she'd given him, working it through whatever internal channels he had access to, building toward the moment when the findings could be properly surfaced. She told herself that until she stopped believing it, the second email came on a Tuesday morning, 8 words long. "Hold off for now, I'll be in touch." She read it 3 times. Then she closed her laptop and went to make coffee and stood in her kitchen for a while, looking at nothing in particular. Hold off meant don't submit. I'll be in touch meant he wasn't ready to tell her why. The combination meant something had happened on his end that he couldn't explain in an email, which meant the pressure had reached him, which meant someone above Marcus had become aware that there was a question and had answered it in the way that questions like that get answered in firms like Whitford. She waited 2 more weeks. No contact. She checked the municipal agenda on a Thursday evening, the kind of routine check she had built into her week the way other people built in gym sessions or grocery runs. And there it was, the Caldwell Overpass renovation contract, scheduled for ratification at the next municipal approval session, 14 days away. She sat very still for a moment. Then she opened the city's public comment portal, a municipal system so deliberately unglamorous that it seemed designed to discourage use, with its gray interface and its 3 business day submission window, and its requirement that all documents be uploaded in a specific file format that the instructions page described incorrectly. She had used it once before, years ago, on a drainage assessment that nobody had read. She navigated it from memory. She uploaded the report, all 41 pages of her findings, properly formatted, properly sourced, with her full name and license number on the title page. The system generated a confirmation number. She wrote it down. Then she sat back and looked at what she had just done. She had not told Marcus. She had not told her firm. She had signed her name to a document that directly contradicted the structural assessment of a $40 million contract tied to one of the most powerful infrastructure developers in the city, and she had submitted it into the public record where it could not be quietly recalled or conveniently misfiled. Her phone was on the table beside her laptop. It stayed silent for the rest of the evening. It was still silent the next morning when she arrived at work, badged in, and walked to her desk. It was her senior partner's assistant who came to find her, not him, which told her something before a single word was spoken. "He'd like to see you. When you have a moment." The way she said "when you have a moment" made it very clear that the moment was now. She sat on that bench for 40 minutes, not because she didn't know what to do, but because she needed to be sure that when she stood up and walked to her car, she was doing it as someone who had made a decision, not someone who had been moved. There is a difference. It matters. The line outside the Meridian Grand had thinned by the time she finally rose. The last few attendees were filtering in, badges swinging, conversations already half started. Nobody looked at the woman on the bench across the street. Nobody had looked at her since she stepped aside, which was its own kind of answer. Being ignored when you're in pain is one thing. Being ignored so completely, so automatically, that you understand you were never quite visible to begin with. That is something else entirely. She drove home. She made tea she didn't drink. She sat at her kitchen table with her notes app open and wrote down everything she could remember about the evening in the order it had happened, with times attached where she had them. Then she went to bed and lay there for 2 hours before her body finally conceded to sleep. The next morning, she called the event coordinator. It took 3 attempts to find the right person. The Meridian Grand routed her twice before she reached a woman named Pamela. Efficient, professionally warm, the kind of voice that has handled complaints long enough to have a system for it. Naya did not frame it as a complaint. She framed it as a discrepancy. She had a confirmed registration. She had been told she was not on the approved list. She was hoping Pamela could help her understand what had happened. Pamela put her on hold for 4 minutes. When she came back, her voice had changed, not unfriendly. But be careful now, where it had been opened before. I can see your registration in the system, Pamela said. It was valid. There was a call to our coordination office the afternoon of the event. A guest list amendment was requested. From whom? A pause. I'm not really supposed to. It came from Whitford's office, from their events team. Naya wrote it down. Thank you, Pamela. I appreciate you telling me. Of course, I'm sorry about what happened. She hung up and sat with that for a moment. Then she opened her documentation file and added the entry, time-stamped. The follow-up email from Pamela arrived 40 minutes later. It was 3 sentences. Formally worded, it said that, upon reflection, Pamela had reviewed the situation further and wanted to clarify that she may have been mistaken about the source of the amendment request, that the event involved multiple coordinating parties, and that she could not confirm the specific origin with certainty. She apologized for any confusion. Nia read it, added it to the file, noted the time between the phone call and the email, 41 minutes. Noted that no one calls to unsay something unless someone has told them to. Daniel Reeves called her that afternoon. She hadn't reached out to him. He had seen her outside the hotel and had, apparently, been thinking about it since. He talked quickly, quietly, like someone checking over their shoulder. He had been inside the GALA. He had overheard 2 men near the bar. He didn't catch their names, but he recognized one of them as a Whitford senior associate. The words he heard clearly enough to repeat, the Monroe situation had been handled. That's what they said, Daniel told her. Handled. Like it was a task. Would you put that in writing? The silence on his end was long enough to be its own answer. Naya, I've got a renewal coming up with a firm that does a lot of work adjacent to Whitford's contracts. I can't. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have called, probably. I just thought you should know. I appreciate it, she said, because she did, and because she understood. People had mortgages. People had renewals. She had spent enough years in this industry to know that courage was a luxury most people couldn't bill by the hour. He texted the next morning anyway. I can't be involved in this. I'm sorry. She replied, I know. Thank you for calling. Olivia Hayes never responded at all. Not to the voicemail, not to the text. 3 days of silence from a woman who had, 2 months earlier, invited Nia to her firm's quarterly lunch and introduced her to 3 people as one of the sharpest structural engineers in the city. The silence said something a response never could. Her senior partner's name was Gerald Fitch. He had a corner office with 2 windows and a collection of industry awards arranged as if they had been placed carefully rather than accumulated naturally. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, the way people gesture when they want you to know the chair was their idea. He used the phrase, industry relationships, 4 times in 6 minutes. Naya counted. He talked about the importance of professional channels, about the way the industry depended on trust, about how a person's reputation was built over years and could be complicated by, he paused here, chose his word, unilateral actions. He never told her to retract the submission. He didn't need to. The entire conversation was the request, dressed up in enough professional language that neither of them would ever have to acknowledge what had actually been said. She thanked him for his time. She returned to her desk. She sat down, opened her laptop, and stared at the screen for a moment. Then she opened a blank document and began building the file properly. Every entry dated. Every name is spelled correctly. Every email, every call, every silence logged with the time it arrived and, if applicable, the time it stopped. She worked for 2 hours without looking up. She was halfway through cross-referencing the timeline when her screen lit up with a new email notification. The sender made her stop. It was from the Municipal Infrastructure Office, not the public comment portal, the office itself, a named address, a real person. The subject line read, Re, Caldwell Overpass, Public Submission Query. Her hand stayed on the mouse for a moment before she clicked it open. The regional contractor's networking lunch was held in a hotel conference room that smelled like carpet cleaner and reheated ambition. 40 people. A buffet with chafing dishes that had been replenished once and then quietly abandoned. Name badges on lanyards that nobody actually needed because everyone already knew everyone, which was, of course, the entire point of being there. Naya arrived 7 minutes early. She took a plate. She found a seat near the middle of the room, not the back, which read as avoidance, and not the front, which read as desperation. The middle. She had learned the geometry of these rooms a long time ago. She knew something was wrong within 10 minutes. It wasn't anything she could have pointed to in a way that would have held up in a conversation. It was subtler than that. The way a cluster of 3 people near the coffee station shifted slightly when she approached, not moving away, just rearranging, the way people rearrange when a space suddenly feels different. The way the rearrangement completed itself so naturally that anyone watching would have seen nothing at all. Victoria Sterling was near the far window, speaking to 2 men from the city's planning office. She was the head of procurement at the infrastructure office, the kind of title that meant she was in the room when contracts were discussed and out of the room when they were publicly announced. She saw Nia come in. She offered a smile that lasted exactly half a second and contained nothing behind it, the way you smile at someone you have already finished thinking about. Nia smiled back and moved on. The worst moment came 20 minutes in. A young engineer named Priya had emailed Nia 3 weeks ago asking for mentorship advice. A long, careful email, the kind that takes an hour to write. Nia had responded with 2 pages of notes. Priya had replied with genuine gratitude. When Nia sat down at the table where Priya was already seated, Priya looked up, registered her, and within 90 seconds had found a reason to pick up her plate and move to a conversation happening across the room. She didn't look back. Nia ate. She introduced herself to 2 people she hadn't met, a contracts administrator from a suburban firm, a junior consultant who seemed genuinely unaware that anything was happening. She asked questions and listened to the answers, refilled her water glass, and checked her watch only twice in 2 hours. She did not let her face change. It was near the coat check on her way out that she heard it. 2 men. She didn't know them. Faces she might have seen in passing at other events. Names she couldn't place. They were standing close together, the way people do when they're not trying to be overheard but haven't thought to check who's behind them. The Monroe Report. Apparently, the calculations were based on outdated load standards. Someone at the board already flagged it. Who commissioned it? That's the thing. Nobody can verify it was formally commissioned at all. It might be a freelance submission. You know how those go. She stood very still for 3 full seconds, long enough to understand exactly what she was hearing, long enough to know it hadn't started with these 2 men, that it had been handed to them already shaped, already worded, already designed to travel, the way only certain kinds of information are designed. The kind that doesn't need to be true to be effective, it only needs to be repeatable. She turned around. Victoria Sterling was still near the window. The 2 men from planning had moved on. She was alone for a moment, holding a glass of water, looking at her phone with a particular focus of someone who is actually checking the time. Victoria. Victoria looked up. Her expression reset itself into something professionally pleasant. Nia, are you heading out? I heard something near the coat check just now that I'd like to address directly with you, given your position at the infrastructure office. Something passed across Victoria's face. It was brief and controlled and gone before it could be named. I'm happy to hear any concerns through the proper submission channels. Someone in this building is circulating false information about the Caldwell assessment. The load standards in my report are current. The commission is documented. I'd like to know if this is coming through your office. The room didn't go silent exactly, but the quality of the noise around them changed. Conversations continued. People continued eating. But the radius of attention had shifted in the way it shifts when something real is being said in a room that isn't used to it. Victoria's smile returned. The half-second version. I really wouldn't know anything about that, but I'd encourage you to be careful about making accusations in professional settings. A gentle pause. It doesn't tend to reflect well. She said it the way you say something you want 3 people to remember. Nia stood there 1 second too long. She knew it while it was happening. She had made her point. The professional thing, the strategic thing, was to nod and leave and let the moment close behind her. But she was tired in a way that 11 years of careful behavior had built up without her noticing, and the tiredness had a weight to it tonight, and the weight decided. I have every email, every calculation reference, every date. Her voice was level, but something underneath it had surfaced just enough to be visible. I just want that to be known. Victoria nodded slowly, as though filing the information away somewhere she'd decide to use of later. Then she turned back to the window. In the car, Nia sat without starting the engine for a while. She replayed the last 4 minutes. Not the part where she confronted Victoria. She stood by that. The part where she said, I have every email. The part where she let them see that it was getting to her. That was the part that would cost something. She didn't know yet what or how much, but she had been in this industry long enough to know that showing your nerves in front of the wrong people was the kind of small mistake that came back wearing a different name. She drove home. She opened her documentation file. She checked every date, every reference, every entry. It was all there, correct, sourced, and real. She closed the laptop. She sat in her kitchen, looked at the credit card statement on the table, and did not call anyone. 3 days later, she opened her work email at 4:47 p.m. and found a message from her firm's senior partner with no subject line. Her contract would not be renewed at the end of the quarter. No explanation, no meeting requested, no language that invited a response. Just the end of something, delivered in 4 sentences on a Thursday afternoon, as though it were an administrative update. Her hands stayed still on the keyboard. Her screen stayed exactly as it was, and then her phone lit up on the desk beside her, a number she didn't recognize, area code from the city's municipal building, calling at 4:51 p.m. on the same Thursday she had just lost her job. She didn't answer the call. She watched the phone light up and vibrate against the desk. The municipal area code sitting there like a question she wasn't ready to answer on the same afternoon she had just been told she no longer had a job. She let it ring. It stopped. No voicemail. She sat in the silence it left behind. The office was emptying around her. She could hear it. The small sounds of a late afternoon winding down. Bags being zipped. A conversation somewhere down the hall trailing off into laughter. The elevator chiming twice. Nobody came to her desk. Nobody stopped by to ask if she was all right, which told her that word moved faster through a firm than formal emails did, and that the people who walked past her in the corridor already knew what she had just found out. She shut down her computer. She collected what she needed. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button, rode it down alone, walked to her car in the parking garage, and sat in it for 22 minutes without starting the engine. She thought about the Danner and Associates incident. She thought about being 26 years old and being told very professionally that her contract was being restructured, which turned out to be a word that meant ended. She thought about the 4 months that followed, the ones nobody ever asked about because they didn't fit neatly into the version of the story where she came out fine. She had come out fine eventually, but fine had a cost, and the cost had never fully cleared. She thought about the credit card, the certification loan. The $1,200 ticket had bought her 40 minutes on a bench and a note on her phone, and nothing else. She thought about slide 15 and whether the font was large enough to read from the back of a room. She started the car. Her apartment received her the way it always did, quietly, without ceremony, as functional and undemanding as she had designed it to be. She had never spent much time decorating. There was a bookshelf with binders on one side and novels she hadn't finished on the other. A kitchen table that served as a desk most evenings. A kettle. A lamp that gave better light than the overhead fixture, which she never used. On the narrow shelf beside the window, there was one photograph. Her mother, at Naya's university graduation, was holding the commencement program with both hands, slightly bent at the corners from the grip. Her mother had held it the entire ceremony. 3 hours, Naya had noticed from the stage and had thought, at the time, that it was endearing. She thought something different about it now. She made tea. She stood at the window while it steeped and looked at the street below, which offered nothing particular in return. Then she called her mother, not to talk about any of it. She had not told her mother about the report, or the gala, or the networking lunch, or the email that had arrived at 4:47 that afternoon. There was a version of this conversation where she did, and she knew how it would go. Her mother would worry loudly in the way that felt like pressure even when it was love, and Nia would end up managing her mother's feelings about the situation instead of sitting with her own. So she called for the voice only, just to hear it. Her mother answered on the second ring. "There you are. I was thinking about you today. Were you?" "I was. How are things?" "Fine, Ma." A pause, smaller than most people would notice. Her mother noticed everything. "You always say that." "Because things are usually fine." Nia, just her name, spoken in the particular register her mother reserved for moments when she knew something was being left out and had decided not to push, which was somehow worse than pushing, because it meant she was trusting Nia to find her way to the truth on her own schedule. They talked for 18 minutes about other things. Her mother's neighbor, a television series her mother had started, whether Nia was eating enough, which was a question her mother had been asking since Naya was 22 and which had never once been answered to her satisfaction. Nia laughed twice, both times real. When she hung up, she sat at the kitchen table for a while with her hands around the mug. The credit card statement was where she had left it, face up, current balance printed in a font that had always struck her as unnecessarily bold for bad news. She turned it face down. Then she opened her laptop. She found the Regional Infrastructure Review Board's website through the municipal portal, a site that looked like it hadn't been redesigned since the early 2010s, all block text and nested PDF links. She navigated it slowly, following each link to its end. Open sessions, public presentations, submission criteria. There it was, an open call for engineering presentations. Current agenda, submissions accepted on a rolling basis for the session scheduled in 12 days. Deadline for applications, 4 days from today. She read the submission requirements twice. Professional license number, summary of findings, relevant documentation, standard form, fillable PDF, submitted through the same gray municipal portal she had used for the public comment. The kind of form that looked like it was designed to discourage people from completing it. She had navigated it once already. She knew its specific dysfunction. She knew which fields required a particular format and which instructions were wrong. She opened a new document and began writing. She worked for 2 hours without stopping. The apartment stayed quiet around her. The mug went cold. At some point, the street outside got quieter too, the way streets do after a certain hour, and the only sounds were the keys and the occasional bus 2 blocks over. She was nearly through the summary section when her laptop chimed. An email. Municipal Infrastructure Office. The same address that had appeared in her inbox 3 days ago. The one that had arrived the same evening she'd come back from a meeting with Gerald Fitch and started building her documentation file in earnest. She had replied to that first email with her full report attached, her license number in the signature, and a single sentence: "I am available to discuss the findings at your earliest convenience." That had been 3 days ago. She had heard nothing since. She moved the cursor to the inbox and clicked. The email was 4 lines long. It was not from the general office address. It was from a named account. A real person, a title she recognized. Senior Legal Counsel, Municipal Infrastructure Division. She read it once, then she read it again, more slowly, the way you read something when you need to be certain you haven't misunderstood. She hadn't misunderstood. They weren't asking about her findings. They weren't requesting a meeting. They were writing to inform her that a formal complaint had been filed against her, alleging that her public submission contained proprietary methodology derived from confidential Whitford infrastructure internal documents, and that, pending review, her engineering license was under administrative hold. Her license, the one she had worked 11 years to build, the one she had listed on the title page of every document she had ever signed, the one that, without it, meant she could not work, could not submit, could not present, could not stand in front of any board as anything other than a civilian with an opinion. The submission deadline was in 4 days. Her license was on hold tonight. She had read about administrative license holds before. They came up occasionally in professional forums. Cautionary threads, edge cases, the kind of thing that happened to other people in circumstances that always seemed, from a distance, to involve some degree of fault on the holder's part. She had never looked up the specific process. She had never needed to. She looked it up now. The Iowa State Board of Engineering's website had a section on license status disputes buried 4 clicks deep beneath a tab labeled Regulatory Compliance. She read it twice. An administrative hold could be filed by any party with standing: a firm, a municipality, another licensed professional, and triggered an automatic review period during which the license was listed as inactive in the public database. The review could take anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months, depending on caseload. During that period, the license holder could continue to prepare submissions, but could not present as a licensed engineer in any official capacity. She closed the browser. She sat in the silence of her apartment for a long time, long enough that the room got dark around her and she didn't reach to turn on the lamp. The complaint alleged that her report used proprietary methodology derived from confidential Whitford internal documents. She knew what that meant. It meant Marcus. It meant the scoping email. It meant the original file he had sent her, the 43 pages she had used as the basis for her independent review, the document that had been transferred to her without a confidentiality designation, without a watermark, without any instruction other than send me the file, and his reply delivering it without comment. She had not used his methodology. She had used his file as context and built her calculations entirely from published standards. Her report cited nothing from the Whitford document directly, but that distinction, the difference between using a document for context and deriving methodology from it, was precisely the kind of distinction that could be made to look blurry by someone with access to good legal counsel and a motivation to make it look blurry. She reached for her phone. She opened her contacts and scrolled to Marcus Holloway's name and held her thumb over it for a moment. Then she put the phone down. If she called him now, tonight, the same evening the complaint was filed, and his phone was monitored, or if he mentioned the call to anyone in his building, she had just handed them something they didn't have yet. Evidence of coordination. Evidence that she and Marcus were in contact after the submission. She didn't know if his phone was monitored. She had no way of knowing, which meant she had to behave as though it was. She got up, she turned on the lamp. She went to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and looked into it without interest and closed it again. The submission deadline was in 4 days. Her license was on administrative hold tonight, which meant that if she submitted her application to the review board in the next 4 days, her license number, which was required on the application, would come back inactive when the board's administrative office ran its standard verification check. An inactive license meant an incomplete application. An incomplete application meant no presentation slot. She had 4 days to get the hold lifted. She had never done this before. She didn't have a lawyer. She had a lease, a credit card, and a loan balance, and 11 years of documentation that nobody had asked for yet. She knew her union rep vaguely, a man named Stewart who had sent a welcome email when she first joined the firm 3 years ago, and whom she had never needed to contact since. She sent Stewart an email at 9:23 p.m. Professional, clear, 3 paragraphs. She attached the legal counsel email, the complaint summary, and the link to the board's hold documentation. She did not editorialize. She stated what had happened and what she needed. She sent it and did not wait for a reply because it was 9:23 p.m. on a Thursday and Stewart was not going to reply tonight. And if she sat watching her inbox, she would not sleep. And she needed to sleep. She opened her presentation file instead. She worked on slide 15 for 40 minutes. The page references were already there. She had built them in weeks ago, but she adjusted the font size and the column spacing and the way the source citations aligned with the deviation markers, because the slide was doing significant work and it needed to be immediately readable from any position in a municipal boardroom, which she had now mentally mapped 3 times based on photographs she had found on the City Council's public website. She worked until midnight. Then she closed the laptop and went to bed and lay in the dark. She did not sleep for a long time. At 6:47 the next morning, her phone lit up with a reply from Stewart. She read it sitting on the edge of her bed, still in yesterday's clothes, the lamp on the bedside table casting the only light in the room. Stewart had read her email. He had, he said, spoken to the board's regulatory office first thing. He had contacts there, he explained, from a previous case 2 years ago. The administrative hold had been filed the previous evening, which she knew. What he had been told informally was that the filing had been accompanied by a letter from Whitford Infrastructure's legal team that was, in his words, unusually thorough for a first-stage complaint. He was going to make calls this morning. He would know more by noon. He ended his email with one sentence that sat at the bottom of the screen like a stone. "Naya, I want to be honest with you. The timeline here is going to be very tight, and I can't promise the hold will be resolved before the submission window closes." She read that last sentence again. Then she got up, went to the kitchen, and started the kettle. She had 3 days, a union rep who was making calls, a ready presentation, and a license that was currently listed as inactive in a public database that any board administrator would check before confirming her slot. She poured the water. She sat down. That was when she noticed the second email, the one that had arrived at 11:58 p.m. last night while she was working on slide 15, while she was adjusting font sizes and believing that the only problem she had left to solve was legibility. It was from an address she didn't recognize, a personal account, not institutional. The name in the sender field was one she did not know, but the subject line had 4 words that made her set the mug down very carefully. "I know about Marcus." The email had 4 words in the subject line and no signature in the body, just a name, Marcus Holloway, and beneath it, a single sentence. He kept everything. Ask him about the October file. That was all. Nia read it 3 times. Then she checked the sender address again. A string of letters and numbers at a free email domain, the kind of account that takes 45 seconds to create and leaves nothing behind. She checked the timestamp. 11:58 p.m. Late enough that whoever sent it had waited until they were certain the working day was over. Careful enough that they had left nothing traceable. Specific enough that they knew exactly what they were pointing her toward. She put the phone face down on the table. She picked it back up. The October file. She had received Marcus's file in October. The 43 pages. The file he had sent without a confidentiality designation, without explanation beyond the implicit one. The one she had understood and accepted and built 6 weeks of careful work on top of. She had never called it the October file. That was his name for it, which meant the person who had sent this email had spoken to Marcus, or had access to his records, or was Marcus himself, writing from a personal account at midnight because his work email was no longer safe. She did not reply. She sat with it instead, the way she sat with technical problems that had more than one possible explanation, patiently, without committing to any of them yet, turning it over until the shape of it became clearer. There were 3 possibilities. The email was from Marcus reaching out sideways because he couldn't reach out directly. It was from someone close to Marcus who was trying to help without exposing themselves. Or it was from someone on the other side, someone who knew about the October file and wanted to see what Nia would do with the information, wanted to see if she would contact Marcus and hand them the coordination evidence they were currently missing. She did not reply. She added the email to her documentation file, screenshot and timestamp included, and went to bed. Claire Bennett arrived at her office at 7:15 a.m., which was standard for her, and found 11 emails waiting, which was also standard. She worked through them in order of institutional consequence, not urgency, because she had learned over 22 years on various municipal boards that urgency was a feeling and consequence was a fact, and conflating the two was how decisions got made badly. She was on the 7th email when she paused. It had arrived overnight from a sender with no name, a generic address, free domain, the kind that flagged automatically as low priority. She would normally have archived it unread. She didn't this time, because the subject line contained a case reference number she recognized. The Caldwell Overpass public comment filing. She had seen that number 2 days ago in a routine agenda briefing, and had noted, without particular interest, that a public submission had been logged against the contract. She opened the email. It was 3 sentences. It directed her to a public comment submission under the name Nia Monroe, referenced 2 academic papers by the same author available through the State Engineering Society's publication archive, and said nothing else. No ask, no argument, no indication of who had sent it or why. Claire read the 3 sentences again. Then she navigated to the public comment portal and pulled up the Caldwell submission. She read it the way she read everything, without deciding what she thought about it until she had finished. It took her 26 minutes. When she was done, she opened the first of the 2 academic papers the email had referenced. It was a graduate-level analysis of load distribution modeling in municipal bridge renovation contexts, published 7 years ago, tightly argued, clearly sourced. She read enough of it to understand what she was dealing with. Then she asked her administrative assistant to run a standard background check on the name, license status, complaint history, and professional standing. The kind of check the board ran on any external presenter before a public session slot was confirmed. Routine, documented, defensible. The result came back within the hour. Clean record. Valid engineering license. No outstanding complaints. She pulled up the open session application file. There was a submission from Nia Monroe, received 2 days ago, complete, properly formatted, license number included. It had been sitting in the pending queue, unassigned, waiting for a board member to either advance it or decline it before the confirmation window closed. Claire read the application summary. 4 paragraphs, specific, technical, and directly relevant to a contract currently on the active municipal agenda. She typed a note into the session file. Presenter credentials verified. Topic directly relevant to active agenda item. She marked the application confirmed and forwarded it to the scheduling coordinator with a single line: "Please confirm this slot for the Tuesday session." Then she moved to email number 8. She did not contact Nia Monroe. There was no procedural reason to, and Claire Bennett did not do things without a procedural reason. The application had been properly submitted. The credentials had been verified. The slot had been confirmed. That was the process, and the process existed precisely so that individual board members did not become personally entangled in the cases that came before them. She was not trying to help anyone. She was managing the board's liability exposure, which meant ensuring that every submission that met the criteria was given its proper hearing, so that no one could later argue that relevant technical information had been withheld from the record. That was the job. It was unglamorous, and it was important, and she had been doing it long enough to know that most people never understood the difference between those two things. By 9:40 a.m., the confirmation had been sent to the scheduling coordinator. By 9:41 a.m., it sat in a queue with 11 other administrative items waiting to be processed. It would reach Nia Monroe's inbox sometime that afternoon. A standard confirmation email, auto-generated, no personal message attached. What Claire Bennett did not know, because there was no reason she would, was that the license number she had verified as valid at 8:53 that morning had been placed under administrative hold at 6:17 the previous evening. What she also did not know was that the scheduling coordinator who handled presentation confirmations cross-referenced license numbers against the board's regulatory database as a matter of standard procedure, and that database is updated every morning at 9 a.m., which meant that when the coordinator opened the queue at 10:15 a.m. and ran the standard check on Nia Monroe's application, the license number that Claire Bennett had confirmed as valid 90 minutes earlier now returned a single automatic system-generated status: inactive, under administrative review. The coordinator flagged it, pulled the application from the confirmed queue, and sent a hold notification to the board's compliance office as protocol required, pending resolution of the license status discrepancy. Nia Monroe's presentation slot, confirmed at 9:40 a.m., had been suspended by 10:22 a.m. She didn't know yet. The notification was still being processed, but somewhere across the city, in a building Nia had never set foot in, a man named Gerald Park, senior associate at Whitford Infrastructure's legal division, received an automated alert from the regulatory database at 10:23 a.m. because his office had filed the complaint and been set up to receive status notifications as the filing progressed. He read it, set his coffee down, and picked up his phone. The license hold had been lifted at 7:54 a.m. on the morning of the session, not because the complaint had been resolved. It hadn't and wouldn't be for several weeks, but because Stewart, her union rep, had spent 3 days making calls to people who made calls to other people, and had eventually reached someone at the Board of Engineering who understood that an administrative hold filed the evening before a submission deadline, based on a complaint that contained no supporting documentation beyond a letter from a private firm's legal division, was the kind of procedural irregularity that created far more liability than it resolved. The hold had been filed correctly. It had also been filed strategically. Those two things were not mutually exclusive, and the person Stewart had reached was experienced enough to know the difference. The reinstatement came through as a single line in an email. Nia had read it standing in her kitchen at 7:56 a.m., still in the clothes she had slept in, the kettle not yet on. She read it twice. Then she got in the shower. She arrived at the municipal building with 20 minutes to spare. The room was smaller than she had imagined from the photographs. Lower ceilings, older chairs, a projector screen that had been pulled down at a slight angle and never adjusted. She set up her laptop at the presenter's table. She advanced through her slides once, quietly, just to confirm the transitions. Slide 15 loaded clean. The font was large enough. She sat down and waited. The room filled slowly. Board members, administrative staff, a handful of attendees from the public gallery, contractors, she assumed, or observers from the planning office. She recognized no one from where she sat until, 3 minutes before the session opened, she saw Charles Whitford come in through the side door and take a seat in the second row. She had not known he would be there. She took that information and set it aside. She was the fourth presenter. She sat through 3 agenda items: a drainage contract amendment, a zoning clarification, a facilities maintenance schedule, with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting for something for a long time and has learned not to spend the waiting. When her name was called, she walked to the front of the room. She presented for 20 minutes. Her voice was level. She did not rush, and she did not perform. She had built the presentation to carry its own weight, and she trusted it to do that. And it did. The board members followed. She could tell from the way their eyes moved, tracking between the screen and their printed copies of the agenda, the small adjustments in posture that meant something had landed. She was on slide 14 when the man in the third row raised his hand. She knew him by type, if not by name. The practiced calm, the hand raised not as a question, but as an interruption wearing a question's clothing. Point of process. I'd like to ask whether the presenter's methodology has been independently peer-reviewed. Some of these load figures appear to differ substantially from the contracted assessment, and I think the board should be aware of the credentialing context before concluding. 2 board members looked up. Naya paused. 1 breath. Not to compose herself. She was already composed. To let the room register that she was not rattled by the interruption, that she had expected something like it, that her answer was already built into slide 15 and had been for weeks. The methodology follows ASCE 7.2.2 standards. The load combinations on slide 12 are drawn directly from the International Building Code. The contracted assessment deviated from both at 3 specific calculation points, which I've documented with page references on slide 15. She advanced the slide. If there are questions about my credentials, my license number is listed on the title page. The Iowa State Board of Engineering can verify it in under 2 minutes. She said it without looking at the man who had raised his hand. She was looking at the board. Claire Bennett spoke before anyone else could. We'll note the credential reference for the record. Please continue, Miss Monroe. The man sat back. Nia continued. The final slide was the timeline. She had debated, in the weeks of building this presentation, whether to include it. It was the most personal element, the one that mapped not just the engineering findings, but the sequence of events surrounding them. She had included it because it was relevant. After all, the board needed to understand why an independent assessment had been filed through a public comment portal rather than through official channels, and because the truth of a thing and the context of that truth were not separable when the context itself was part of the record. She clicked on it and said nothing. She let the room read it. The dates, the email subjects, the GALA, the submission, the hold. The sequence ran in clean horizontal rows across a white background, each entry sourced, each gap explained. It did not accuse anyone by name. It did not need to. The room was very quiet. Naya stood at the front of it and counted. 1, 2, 3. She was aware of Charles Whitford in the second row in the way you are aware of weather, not looking at it directly, but knowing precisely where it was and what it was doing. He was very still, the particular stillness of a man who had spent 30 years learning to be unreadable in rooms that were turning against him, and who was now deploying that skill in earnest. 8, 9, 10. Claire Bennett said, "Thank you, Miss Monroe. We have several questions." 11. The questions were real, not procedural, substantive. Board members who had clearly spent time with the Caldwell file before this session, who had specific pages marked, who asked about load combinations and deviation thresholds, and the timeline of the municipal approval process, with the focused attention of people who understood that they were now part of a record they had not previously known they were part of. Naya answered each one, fully, without editorializing. Whitford did not speak. He sat in the second row through the entire question period, and when it ended, he did not approach the presenter's table or the board members and left through the side door the same way he had come in, without incident, without confrontation, without anything that could be pointed to or documented. He simply left, which was its own kind of answer. She was in the corridor outside, closing her bag, when she heard her name. Marcus Holloway looked like a man who had not slept well in several weeks. He was holding the manila folder against his chest with both hands in the way people hold things they are afraid of dropping. He stopped a few feet from her and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he held out the folder. "Email chain," he said. "The original scoping request, the file transfer, my internal flag from August, the one I was told to set aside." He paused. "I'm going to submit this to the board's administrative office this afternoon. I wanted you to know." Naya looked at the folder, then at him. "I'm sorry," he said. "It took me too long." She thought about the 43 pages, the silence after she submitted, the whisper campaign, the hold, the parking garage. All of it was sitting between where they were now and where this had started. "You came," she said. He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say more and had decided that more was not what the moment needed. She took the folder. They stood in the corridor for another moment. Then he went toward the administrative office, and she went toward the exit, and the distance between them grew in the ordinary way that distances grow when people are done with the thing they came to do. She was 20 minutes from home when her phone rang through the car speakers, her mother's name on the screen. She had texted her that morning. Nothing specific, just that she had a meeting today that she'd call later. Her mother had replied with a single emoji and then, apparently, had decided that later had arrived. Naya answered. "How was the meeting?" her mother asked, the way she always asked things, directly, without preamble, as though they had been in the middle of a conversation that had simply been briefly interrupted. Naya drove for a moment without answering. The city moved past the windows, traffic lights, a school, a pharmacy with its sign half lit in the early afternoon. "I think I did something today," she said. Her mother was quiet, not the absence of a response, a real quiet, the kind her mother used when she was listening with her whole attention. "Tell me," she said, and Naya did. She talked for the rest of the drive and then sat in her parked car outside her building and kept talking, and her mother listened without interrupting, which was not something her mother did often, which told Naya that she understood this was not an ordinary story. When Naya finished, her mother said nothing for a moment. Then, "I always knew you were keeping records for a reason." Naya laughed, actually laughed, the sudden, unguarded kind that surprises you before you can decide whether you're in the mood for it. "Go eat something," her mother said. "You never eat when things are hard." "I know. Call me tomorrow. I will." She sat in the car for a little while after they hung up. The street was ordinary around her. A man walking a dog. 2 kids on bikes. A delivery driver double parked outside the pharmacy, hazards blinking in the afternoon light. She went upstairs. She made a real meal for the first time in 2 weeks. Nothing elaborate, just pasta and something from the back of the refrigerator that still had time left on it. She ate at the kitchen table. She turned the credit card statement face down without looking at it. Not because she was avoiding it, but because it could wait. And she had spent enough time lately on things that demanded her attention before they had earned it. The documentation file was still open on her laptop. She added one final entry. Date, time, outcome. 3 lines. Then she created a new folder, moved everything into it, and named it with the only label that seemed accurate. Caldwell. Closed. She closed the laptop. Outside the window, the city continued in its ordinary way, indifferent and alive, full of buildings that needed to be built correctly, and bridges that needed to hold, and calculations that needed to be run by someone who would not trim them to fit a price. 14 months later, the Caldwell overpass was completed to revise specifications. The engineering amendment ran to 61 pages. Naya's name appeared in the footnotes, not prominently, not in the kind of placement that got noticed at industry events or mentioned in press releases. Just there, in the technical record, in the place where the work actually lived. She had written it herself. The footnote read, Independent Structural Assessment, N. Monroe, P.E. Findings incorporated into revised load calculations, sections 4 through 7. It was 11 words. Number 1 removed them. Enjoyed this story? Show some love by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Turn on notifications so you're always first to see our next inspiring story. Love seeing the underestimated win? Dive into our channel for more powerful underdog stories, moments where doubt turns into determination and setbacks turn into unforgettable victories. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next story.